Final panel of the day. Shelter plan, minimize risk and cost to manufacturing in Mexico. The leader for this particular panel will be Carlos Alvarado.
No, tienen lugares asignados.
You'll find out.
Hola. No se ve nada.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank everyone for attending this conference. It is a pleasure to be here again in one of these conferences of Mexico Now. And extreme pleasure to have a conversation with my colleagues from many years of these four great companies, great shelter companies, among other services they might provide, but otherwise known as shelter operators. So Gregorio from Dimsa, Fernando from Intermex, and Paulina from American Industries. Myself, Carlos Alvarado from Prodensa. All right, so let's talk about, we're going to be talking about a shelter. Many of you are aware of it, have listened or have heard about the term, and we'll try to clarify what it means, where does it come from, and most importantly, what are the advantages of the shelter for foreign companies coming to Mexico, especially to set up their manufacturing operations. So if we can go to the first slide, I think it is important to touch base on some of the important dates for the maquila industry, for the IMEX program, and for the shelter as well. And where does it come from, really, and how long have we come? So we have come so far since then in terms of the industry and supporting the industry. So basically, it all began with what was known, still known as the Bracero Program, that was heavily used during the Second World War. And then when the war ended, the Bracero Program also it was not completely ended, but certainly it was very, very limited. So after that, you have to take into consideration that even then, and even prior to that, there's always been a problem or an issue that we still have today, which has to do with illegal immigration into the United States. All right, and those are things that is interesting how important they were in that moment and how important they are still today. So when the program ended, Mexico had to do something to try to minimize that illegal immigration, or try to help to minimize that illegal immigration. But you have to keep in mind that during the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, Mexico was a closed economy. There are a few of us here that, you know, probably not all the way back to the 50s, but 60s and 70s for sure, and we remember that time. So in the 60s, the maquila program was established by the government with the initial intention to create jobs in the border towns, okay, in order to hopefully present job alternatives for these people that were trying to cross the border, okay? And at that time, we can say, okay, it was all duty-free, tax-free, you know, as long as you would use Mexican labor and you would export everything outside of Mexico. But again, it was a closed economy. So in that sense, okay, even foreign companies were not allowed to have majority ownership of their companies in Mexico. So that's the key where the shelter program started, okay? And it was with the intention of having somebody in Mexico providing the legal entity for the foreign company to operate, okay? And that's when it was created, you know, when the shelter got created. So it's a concept that has been in place for many, many years. we want to make a case for saying that it's still very valid and will continue to be very valid, okay, and very attractive for foreign companies, okay? So later, there were changes, of course. Originally, the growth was seen in the border towns, okay? And then something happens in the 80s. Mexico joined the GATT. Foreign companies were allowed to have full ownership of their companies in Mexico. Okay, and then in the 90s, NAFTA was established, okay, and that had an implication of some changes to the Maquila program as well, but it created certainly additional growth. Okay, so, and again, that was the NAFTA program. Then in the 2000s, Maquila program was evolved to the IMEX program, so everybody knows it now as the IMEX program. And then more recently, again, the NAFTA turned into the USMCA. All right, so that's just a little bit of history. Now, that being linked to the activity of the shelter operators and shelter operators, and it's a great pleasure that many of the companies here have been doing this for many years. Okay, in our case 35 years. In the case of American Industries, even more, almost 40. 40.
25.
And 25. So again, we've been doing this for a long time. And again, we definitely see and continue to see the big benefits to this. Let's just go to the next slide, just real quick. Okay, and this is just to show that even though at the beginning it was mostly on the border towns, today the presence of shelter operations are basically covering most of the country. We as well are proud that our four companies that have been doing this for many years have also been expanding through different parts of Mexico to be able to cater to the specific needs of these foreign clients. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go. Let's give the microphone to my colleagues and start with some questions. So again, in general, I would ask Gregorio first. How does the shelter program works, Gregorio?
Thank you, Carlos. Well, the shelter program is basically the origin of the maquila industry. It was conceived like that from the beginning. And the reason is very simple. Foreign companies, in this case, US companies, were kind of afraid on how to do business in Mexico. They didn't know how to do it. And they wanted to concentrate on their core business. So there were companies facilitating this. I don't know if you remember this concept of twin plants. One company in the US, one company in Mexico, all the same related. Well, that's pretty much the shelter. The idea was to provide shelter in Mexico for a manufacturing operation in which this company, a Mexican company, will receive equipment and materials on consignment in this country, legally in this country, or Mexico, transform it into finished goods, and then export it again. That's the basic concept of the maquila and the shelter itself. After a few years, some of these American corporations become more acquainted, more knowledgeable on how to do the business in Mexico, and they started to do it on their own. Normally, in a process we call graduation from shelter to independent standalone operation as a maquiladora, and from that point on to many years. Some of them decided to remain with the shelter program, and we have companies for many years. I think all of us have companies with many years with us, and they rather maintain their operation as it is. But that's the concept. Someone who will help you to take care of the non-core activities so you can concentrate your effort in a core part of your business. We do not know how to make brakes or assemble TV sets or manufacture any medical device, but we can certainly provide the infrastructure, the administrative infrastructure to help you to concentrate on that critical issues in which we believe you are the best on that. So we will put the nest, in this case the shelter, so they can launch the operation and start producing immediately or very soon, with the advantage to cut down the learning curve, have some economy of scale, because we already are operating, and also to cut off a little bit of the red tape that's still in Mexico. Nowadays, as we know, that this red tape is becoming more red and more tape, and that's why the shelter become more, let's say, a reviving of the shelter in the past 18, 20 months, something like that, because of the time leap that most of the new companies takes in order to apply for the IMEX program, as you mentioned it, and then the certificate of VAT to avoid paying a VAT tax. And that is the reason why we become more, let's say, appealing for the foreign investors to start the operation, and then later on they decided whether they go their own way or solo or remain in the shelter. That's for them to decide.
Thank you. Fernando, how do you differentiate, or what are the similarities and the differences between a contract manufacturing and a shelter?
Okay, I will start to say that the best benefit for me for the shelter is to minimize the risk, and that has to be in consideration with the contract manufacturing. But basically, to start an operation in Mexico it's difficult in some ways, and if you do it by yourself, you run into taking a lot of resources, a lot of time in doing activities that are non-core, that are not part of your and not add any value added to your product. So what we recommend is that you use a specialist, somebody that really knows how to do this. If you do it by yourself, it can cause a lot of huge amount of fines, penalties, and things. Not only because you don't want to comply, probably you want to 100% comply with the law, but if you don't know what you have to comply with, it's the first problem. So going back to your question on contract manufacturing, on the shelter, the customer is responsible for productivity, quality, delivery, customer service. The shelter is responsible for human resources, customs, environmental, and all legal aspects of the operating in Mexico. And the difference with the contract manufacturing and the shelter is in the contract manufacturer, the shelter company doesn't have any control of the product. In the shelter, the customer, as I said, they have total control over the production, the quality and all that, and we take care of the rest. So basically, that's the difference, that I would say total control with control risk by the shelter company.
Thank you, Fernando. And we can move to first Paulina's slide. Paulina, if you can help us explain the responsibilities of a shelter structure and what activities are taken care of by the shelter operator in more detail. And so again, linked to the concepts that both Fernando and Gregorio have mentioned, the activities that remain as a responsibility or under control of the client.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. To recall a little bit Fernando's comment, the shelter is your partner. Our companies are your partners, and what we want is your company to succeed in Mexico, and we do this together. The client does it on the manufacturing area, and we do it on the administrative area. It's a quick startup with low risk and liabilities. You have a partner, which is a shelter company, that has all the experience in the administration challenges, local administration challenges that you have to affront once you come here. It's another country, it's another culture, it's another regulations, another language. So, and part of that is a robust process system and experienced staff, as you can see here, that manage and have updated every time the changes on the laws, the changes on certifications, the updates on every regulation that it's required. We're always on the dot with that, so our clients can be informed and also comply with it. There's a human resource which diversifies with recruitment and selection, payroll, training and compliance, salary and benefits. We work together with you to define your salary and benefits package according to the market, according to the area where you're located. Labor management and union relation, which is very important in the areas where the union has, we have to have a stable labor environment, and we guide our clients to do this. The labor culture is very different one country from another. Mexico, I consider, we're used to a certain time of working, and we can do extra time, or we have Christmas parties, Mexico's Independence Day, and there are special days that need to be celebrated. We guide you on that to collaborate and have the people happy and make a stable environment in your manufacturing plant. And expat support meaning all the, if your staff is coming to Mexico and you need an apartment, you need a car, we guide you in all the establishments, so finding schools for your children, and to feel home, to feel safe and home. And the other area is finance, all the general administration, operational permits, all the accounting and fiscal. I mean, some shelters cover the whole VAT refund, and we work with you together on that, and the accounts and payables and receivables. We do customs, and this is very important because we do the customs from once your product touches Mexico border or port, and once we export it to the country you're sending it to. The same way, we work together with you in the study and make the best way possible for you to have optimized your duties optimization.
Thank you, Paulina. And besides the compliance on all these areas, you brought a very important point, which has to do with the culture. And the culture or bringing in the culture of the company, which is always very important, and it is a particular fact of the shelter operations versus the contract manufacturing, as we were discussing. Under contract manufacturing, it is the culture of the contract manufacturer, what is happening inside the manufacturing floor or at the manufacturing floor. Under a shelter, the culture should be a reflection of the company, the actual company that is under that shelter. And it has been heavily discussed as we in all the debate, we're not going to get into that, but all the debate about availability of labor or what have you. But certainly becoming an employer of choice is something that is absolutely critical for all the companies. Shelter or no shelter, any company starting an operation in Mexico, becoming an employer of choice, and becoming an employer of choice not only through just compensation per se, but the actual culture of the company. And how do we allow these companies to bring in that culture, to replicate that culture, and to adapt that to the Mexican environment? That's also very important and one of the advantages of the shelter. I would like to move to one of Gregorio's slides, so we can dive a little deeper into the shelter and how does it work. So if we can go to the next slide, please. That's correct.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm trying to put in this slide what will be the typical shelter responsibilities. As already mentioned several times here in this panel, the idea behind the shelter operation is that our clients, the foreign entity, will control the core business of the operation. All that it had to do with selection of raw materials, suppliers, components, production scheduling, delivery, quality assurance, engineering, even technical support, and also the selection of key position within the infrastructure that Paulina mentioned. Our responsibility, and although we might collaborate, but they are the responsibility of the foreign entity. This shelter will provide the non-core, the administration part of it. That Paulina mentioned it already, account generalities, accounting, reporting, taxes, human resources and labor union relation, recruitment included, the structure of the payroll, the compensation package from the initiation point to later on the money chart of the company, the import-export compliance that every company had to do within the IMEX program in Mexico, which is very important, the inventory control. And then, of course, it is a company operated in Mexico, and they had to comply with all these laws and regulations regarding environmental health and safety. Those are the areas that we provide as a shelter company. By doing so, there are some costs involved, basically two. The services that we provide that have to be paid, and what we call pass-through cost. The pass-through costs are the costs related to the operation, which is the payroll, the rent, energy, the utilities, sometimes freight, maintenance, and MRO, and insurance, and some other related costs involved with the Mexican operation. We are working with them in the sense that we provide a budget for the expenditures of 1 month. The foreign entity provide the funds, we pay them out, and we present it in the invoice at the end of the month. That's basically how it works. And by doing so, we are accommodated into one of the shelves provided by the government, in Spanish called IMEX de Albergue, which have been recognized. The issue that the IMEX de Albergue exists is that the government recognized the shelter from the very beginning, 50 years ago, but they put it in the law. And by doing so, and they recognize these contracts that exist, commercial contract between foreign companies and Mexican companies to operate under this umbrella or shelter, and also to track all the operations that they perform. That is why one of the issues that we have when I was part of the government some years back, in which I said, well, we need to recognize as foreign investment the equipment and raw materials these companies send to Mexico, which do not transfer property from foreign to local companies. It's not really an import by itself because it's on consignment, but nevertheless will create jobs and will create exports. And since that moment, we start putting that figure into account as part of the foreign investment part of the equation. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you very much. Fernando,
Yes.
what are the type, by experience and what you have seen, what are the type of products that can be manufactured under a shelter? And just to clarify that in terms of whether something from just a simple assembly process all the way to complex manufacturing, just some examples of things that you have seen through the years, and what really applies today.
Oh, perfect. The good thing about the shelter is that, as my colleague said, it's that we don't have to be experts on any process. The customer is expert on doing their own product, so we can do anything. It can be any kind of product. In my experience, we had pecans, we have sugar refining, we have jalapeno peppers, and we have helicopters. We do helicopters, so it's a mix of competencies. We're good to manage the companies. We're good to do the administrative matters, and the company is really good and expert on doing their own process. So we combine those competencies and we make a partnership. And if they find that it's a value-added service, we can stay for a long time. In my experience, I have customers for over 20 years in the shelter that they find a value-added service. They find that they don't have to get into complex, administrative matters that take time, take resources, and I asked one of my customers why he stayed for a shelter for a long time, and he said three things. It's cheaper, because we have economies of scale, and so they don't have to have big-size managers to manage their facility. We can have in-house shelter representatives that can help them, and after we graduate, as you said, they can stay with them. Yeah. So we form them. In the meantime, we are having the shelter. But he said, well, it's cheaper, and second, if I have a problem, I call you, and you have to fix it. So we minimize the risk of the customer. He said, you minimize my risk. I don't have to get into the payroll, which is very complex in Mexico. I don't have to get into the customs issues that could close the company or have big fines. I don't have to get into the labor items of having to select a union or be selected by the wrong union, which is a case in Mexico. You rather work with a union that has an attitude to negotiate and has a fair treatment to employees, because what we want to have is a very nice environment for the customer to be successful in Mexico. So really, it's not a limit. It can be any kind of product. The size is the same. It can be easy assemblies, or can be complex assemblies, or could be even heavy industry. We have some companies that do this kind of industry. A company in Monterrey that we have, that they do the Caterpillar hand that you use on the very heavy machinery. So, I mean, there is no limitation for that.
Thank you. And I think we collectively can proudly say that, for instance, in the aerospace industry, most of the foreign companies that have come to Mexico, a good majority of them have used the shelter program as the way of setting up their operations. And some of the complex medical devices operations as well have used the shelter. So again, that further clarifies that point. Thank you. Thank you. Paulina, on regards to the size, number of people, and based on your experience, because I know you, American Industries, have handled many companies through the years, but if you can talk a little about that and give us some examples of companies utilizing a shelter on their smaller scale and the ones utilizing a shelter on the larger scale.
Okay, well, I'll start with the largest. We have a client, over 2,000 employees from the Eolic, fabricating the wings of the Eolic system in Tamaulipas, and we're receiving several clients and interest on the furniture area, some mostly from China, and there are around 1,000 employees. And that's a big goal, the cultures, where I'm telling you to guide the customer, the client, with the regulations and the people, and how to manage the production with the team. And the other is the smallest. We're going around 10 on an auto part, and we also have recycling of metals, steel and aluminum, and that's part of the smallest company. It's around 20 to 30. So it's all sizes, like you said, from any country. We've worked, I think, 15, 16, 17 countries around. Now more, of course, obviously, is the North American market that everybody's looking for this, where we have this big advantage in Mexico to be neighbor of the biggest consumer. And also, what other, I don't know, auto parts, eolic, furniture, and I got aerospace, of course, in another regions of Chihuahua and Querétaro offices, and IT also, so it's all sectors.
Very good. Yes.
I would like to add something about the sites thing. Although there is no rule or limit on how many employees can a company can have in a shelter program. Obviously, for companies with a smaller number of employees in Mexico, the shelter become more appealing. Why? Because the shelter will provide a very robust administration processes, and the company will enjoy that robust administration that the shelter has to a very small operation. Otherwise, paying accountants, paying HR person, specialized, paying import-export expert for an operation of 20, 50 persons might not make the equation. I mean, the overhead becomes so big for that operation. So, in general, the sweet spot for the shelter operation will be those companies between few workers to 250, 300. That is probably the most of the shelter you're going to find there. Although there are big shelters with a very large numbers, that doesn't mean that it's not possible. But most of them, they're going to be around that number. And because of the reasons that economy of scale, they have that advantage.
I will complement what Gregorio says. Is also the companies that haven't had previous experience, international experience. I think that's a very important item, because you're not going to sell shelters to an OEM, right? We're going to sell shelters to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers that they have the need because of customers' requirements to be here. And they don't have the structure internally to really do everything they need to know and they need to do to come to Mexico. So I think as a complement of what Gregorio says, it's also those kind of companies that are more in the first step to be international, globalized.
Thank you, Fernando. I'm going to go back to Gregorio, and this is a little tricky question, Gregorio. So, what are the variations to a shelter? So, what is really a shelter and what is not a shelter, and how the term has been used indistinctively in some of those, or strictly associated to just soft landing, but again, going back to the specifics of the variations of the shelter, and legally, what is really a shelter?
Legally what?
What is a shelter? So legally speaking.
Okay. Well, you can imagine that in 50 years of experience with the shelter, have been some variations of the shelter. But eventually, the oldest of them all is what we call among us the master shelter. That means one Mexican company that under their wing, they have different foreign entities operating in it, in different locations, but different contracts. That is called the master shelter. That was very popular back in the 80s, 90s, And then after Nafta came to happen, probably they start to going down a little bit and become more popular, what we call the standalone shelter. The same company, the same shelter, create a new corporation of their own, but dedicated to that specific client for whatever reason, cultural of the company, agreements between companies. They don't want it to be part of a master shelter. They wanted their own facility, and their own facility also with their own company. Sometimes we even go further to say, okay, you choose the name on preparation for eventually the graduation point. So they choose the name, we create a company, and we dedicate that shelter to operate that company. Later, probably that company just say, you know what, I think I can go solo, and it was in the contract to sell them the shares of that company. They acquired that company, and the company continued operating. Nobody knew anything, no changes, just a substitution between shareholders, from the Mexican one to the foreign ones, and that's about it. That became very popular after Nafta, because foreign companies became more eager to have their own operation in that sense. But sometimes they don't even graduate at all. They remain in that for many years, and we have some already in that structure, in our case, for 17 plus years. And they are very comfortable with it. They don't want to go out. They say, you know what, you continue. Let's continue as we are. That's probably the more common to operation of shelters. Now, you want to comment before we do?
What I was saying, it's with the latest problems with some of the permits and things like that, the master shelter is becoming more popular now. Because in order to get the IMEX program, is becoming very difficult in some times, and also to have the VAT certification. So the master shelter is becoming now a little bit more popular than before.
I don't want to spook the public, but Fernando is right. This government, federal government we have now, launched a new program to restrain budget, federal budget, and constrain many of the operations of different secretaries. And in the case of IMEX approvals, before this government, there were about 50-something people all over Mexico approving new IMEX programs. And if you remember, we used to have an IMEX in less than 2 weeks.
Yes.
Less than 2 weeks' time.
10 working days.
In 14 days. And it was very simple. Now, the same area that approved the IMEX has only 6 people approving. So the workload is still there, but less people, and concentrated in Mexico City. So imagine one person in Mexico City trying to understand a production of, brakes in Juarez, or in Monterrey, or in Bajío area, about complex processes and components of something that they don't see at all. So it's becoming complicated for them. I'm not making an excuse for them, but that's the reality.
Yeah. And I'm going to link that, I'm going to link the different questions, because that has to do also with one of the advantages of the shelter, where we need to be on top of the game. We need to be aware of the changes in laws, rules, and regulations prior to, and be able to comply with, because of our commitment with the clients. So that's part of what the shelter does. Then, obviously, we were talking about differences on different approaches to the shelter or variations to the shelter. And I'm going to link that to, again, here we are 4 different companies, and they're one thing that is different. 2 of these companies, in this case American Industries and Intermex, have had and continue to have real estate in different forms, but they own real estate and then promote real estate. They have their own real estate. And then there are companies, well, Dimsa does have some real estate as well, and then Prodensa does not have real estate. So there are differences there as well. And with that, I wanna link that to the next question and to have Paulina walk us through a little bit of those differences in terms of real estate. Every manufacturing project needs a building. Okay, so how do we go about solving that or providing a solution for that in terms in that link to the shelter service? So if we can have Paulina's slide, and then she can walk us through that process.
Thank you, Carlos. Well, as experience, most of the companies come and looking directly for the building, and then afterwards, like the shelter, which should be first invite you to reach us, and we guide you to find the best site selection, region, city, to be according to your project's needs. And after that, we, according to your requirements of your project, the size of your building, we help you find the best location, the options of buildings. It could be inventory buildings already existing, or it could be a built-to-suit buildings or warehouses. Out of this, we help you, guide you, inform you, consult you, all the words that can be similar to it, but to tell you surrounding all the market, the labor availability, the transportation, public transportation surrounding this building, food courts near for the people if they want to go out of the plant or they get out and they need a Coke or water or something. How is the area surrounding, the security of the area surrounding the building? And we make a cost analyze also. Not only, we call it the soft data analyze of all of these building options for you. And at the end, this is important because you decide where you want to be located. The client, it's its operations in Mexico. We process what you require us and guide you to do it in the correct way. And the way it's done in Mexico. But at the end, you're the decision-making here in this process. And so also to consider out of the cost that we help you analyze and the other indicators in the market is also to consider the triple net, the maintenance, the insurance, the property tax of the building. If you're inside an industrial park, there's a park fee. And other like utilities costs that would be according to the size of your project. And those are some indicators for you to review. About what I said, there are inventory buildings. If they're not, and you want your own building, you can buy it or lease it. A build-to-suit building takes around 6 to 8 months of construction here in Mexico. But to consider first this timeline of deciding which city, which building, or which park you want to be located, negotiate the lease agreement, previously negotiate the shelter agreement because we will represent you on the lease agreement also as a shelter partner. And all of this timeline, and then the construction. Just for you to view the time process if on a built-to-suit building. And if it's an inventory building, for you to consider that for the EMEX program and consequently the VAT certification, to comply with it, it needs to be a complete building with restrooms, cafeteria, guardhouse, if there's going to be people manufacturing on site. According to your project's needs, it has to be ready to start up. So some inventory buildings don't have this, and it takes another 3 or 4 months for the tenant improvements to be done there. So it's just a matter of finding the best building for you and having the adequations to it so you can, we can help you comply with the EMEX program.
Thank you. So with that said, definitely, it's all very flexible in terms of real estate, and always looking for the best interest of the clients in terms of where it makes the most sense for them to operate in Mexico. We're going to go into the final remarks prior to going into the questions. I will start with one that is very important also in regards to the shelter, and we have been talking about compliance, and that's something that is that is a very important part of the shelter service, of the shelter approach, or the shelter proposition. Compliance with applicable laws, rules, and regulations, and being on top of the game, and being active with all the municipal government, state government, and federal government as to what changes might be affecting the client's operation. To that regard, in terms of the activity that we have seen, and again, all of us having been doing this for many years, we have seen, periods of more activity, periods of slow activity, and what have you, but right now we are seeing one of the busiest years, I would say, for everyone, which is great. But in that sense, there are many, and with the issues and constraint of the supply chain, there's a lot of pressure for companies to come here to either service better their clients or service better the North American market. And in that sense, we are seeing a lot of projects that are coming with a very, very short time frame to be able to execute. Now, that is not always a good equation or a good proposition, because you can make mistakes along the process. What is important here, and what the shelter brings to the table, is to make sure that these operations that are probably not having the time to look at all angles of the project, or don't have the resources, or don't have the knowledge, they can rely on somebody that can take care of that for them. Now, my point here is, it is not only for these suppliers, okay? By taking care of the compliance of these suppliers, we're taking care of the compliance of their clients in Mexico, and that goes up the supply chain. So whether this is a tier 2 being on compliance and helping the tier 1, or a tier 1 being on compliance and helping the OEM not to get into trouble. So that's something that's very important during this period, because of how the government is looking after any potential mistake that a company can do. So in that sense, that's an additional benefit, again, not only for the shelter client, but upstream on the supply chain. Go ahead.
Adding to what you mentioned, Carlos, it's very important to know, to understand one thing. The question for many companies trying to bring a project to Mexico, or companies inviting suppliers to come to Mexico, is when I should, or whether I should contact a shelter company or not from the beginning. And my answer is immediately. Regardless if you came to an agreement, a contract with a shelter or not, touch base with that shelter company. Because the shelter companies will provide vital information for any feasibility study that they will, and they must do before came to this country. They need to be sure of the cost, of the way of doing things, or what they can do here, how they can achieve that, how can they meet the rule of origin in order to bring production lines or not into this country. It's a lot cheaper to make a mistake when you are in the desk or the table of a meeting room than when the investment is right there looking at you, costing a lot of money every single day. So I advise to everybody who can listen to this conversation, get in touch with any shelter company just when you think on Mexico be an option.
And as you said, we have to be one step ahead. There's things like the USMCA compliance that is a lot of things about taxes. Many of my latest prospects, they ask me first, verify the cost, verify if I'm going to pay taxes, verify if I'm going to do this. They are confident with the shelter that they will provide the right information. And I would say that this is a business of confidence. Your customers are going to put the machinery, the raw materials in your hands to produce a product. And also, there is a lot of things that could happen in the middle. You have to have a reliable company to assist you and be there in order to protect you from things that happen. So I think it's, as you said, the information it's worth a lot right now.
Yeah, it's an essence.
And I think at the beginning, as you said, it's very important to have all the data that you need. Make sure that you have the right information in hand to take the decision. Any of us can build you a very good cost model, depending on the process, on the product that you're going to have, and the city and the location. We can build a very good cost model that can give you a very good understanding of the expenses you're going to have, and making your decision easier. So as you say, it's very important to have the right information.
I'm not sure how we're doing with time, but it's time to...
Time has come.
Okay, so I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Yeah,
that
we have a few questions. One is, how long, and you guys have already talked about this a little bit, but this is the question. How long should a shelter model be considered? In my opinion, long-term periods affect competitiveness, but short period process increase it. What do you think?
Well,
I don't think longer period affect competitiveness, not at all, because as long as you control your production, your quality, your materials, it's just like a production line that you have not on your site, but in another site. The question whether I launch an operation through a shelter and how long I will remain in a shelter, it doesn't have to do with the quality at all, because you can achieve that immediately. The reason could be in other areas, like whether my board of directors allow me to do it, whether if I am a public company, do I have to do it, can I do it under my own regulation and policies as a company? That's another different issue, not have to do anything with competitiveness or cost.
I will complement that it's like any other partnership. It has to make sense. Everybody has to win in the process. If after 4 years, the company thinks that it's good enough, they already learn, they don't know how to do things, and they can do it by themselves, fine, we help them to get independent. But many times it makes sense for a long time because the partnership is so good that just keep going, and they say, why should I get involved in those things? So it really depends on your relationship with the customer, and you know, as I said, you know, it has to be a win-win.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the audience. Does the shelter program, are shelter programs prohibited in Mexico with the recent Ley de Subtracción?
Okay, and we discussed that a little bit. No, certainly was an initial thought, and that was a quick reaction, I would say, from some sectors to say, hey, the shelter might be a contradiction to the new law or the outsourcing reform. But the fact is that these legal entities are the ones that are responsible for the manufacturing process, and they are in front of the authorities. They're responsible for the activity, for the manufacturing activity, the transformation activity that is happening, and the labor that is being utilized for that is within the payroll of that same legal entity. So no, there's no issue, no problem there.
Okay, thank you. Paulina, you spoke about having some very large groups still within your shelter. How do shelter companies find workers?
How do we find them?
Yeah.
We have a team of recruiters, and according to the size of the project, we have staff on site, the plant. So there's central offices and also staff, shelter staff on site your plant that will assist you on all of the areas that I mentioned, human resource, customs, finance staff, and a shelter coordinator that will be your direct contact on site. And he will solve the whole situation, or in case there's the back office of us and of everyone in the central office to support us external. But on-site there is.
Do the workers come from local areas, or do they come from all over Mexico?
We have both, but mostly for the surrounding, and we do
In the
recruitment
local- yeah,
surrounding.
surrounding area.
And let me add to that, because there is a fact in obviously on companies that have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
We've been supporting manufacturing operations with the different admin areas, including the HR, and conducting all the HR functions, including the recruiting, the screening, and the hiring of the people. Through the years, we have become experts on recruiting for manufacturing positions. In fact, in some of the differences, I mean, we have taken that a step beyond and be able to offer that as a service for other companies that are not under a shelter. So within that, in our case, Prodensa, it has a huge activity on that, where we are basically fulfilling anywhere between 10 to 12,000 jobs on a yearly basis. So that comes from all that experience through the years in recruiting, screening, and hiring manufacturing positions and understanding those manufacturing positions.
And you're recruiting all around Mexico?
All around Mexico and now outside of Mexico as well, not to bring them to Mexico, but within that particular activity.
I would like to add to that, and that is why I say that foreign companies trying to do an operation in Mexico should contact a shelter immediately. If you're going to decide on one specific site, and we as SoftData knows that you're gonna face problems of labor shortages in 1 or 2 years, we will let you know. So before you take any decision, you should consider that. That's one thing. The other thing that Carlos is mentioning is very important. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been asked, Greg, can you get us a engineer, black belt, 10-year experience with English and German, fluent, and that. I say, sure, I can get it. Are you willing to pay $20,000 a month? Oh no, we will pay only $2,000. I cannot get it. I mean, you cannot ask for Batman and pay as a Robin.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it is important, all of these sub-data and nuances on how to recruit people in Mexico be passed on to the project leaders before they take a decision, in order to ponder all the different aspects on how to maneuver the area of HR in Mexico to have a successful operation now, 1 year from now, and 10 years from now.
Fernando?
Yeah, I think that it's also important to tell you that our employees are very well paid. We pay competitive wages to the employees. In our case, we do a survey of the market, and we tell the customer, these are the salaries. Where do you want to be on the market? Want to be average, over average? So normally, we have a very competitive salaries compared to probably a contract manufacturer or some others that are, very affected by the cost. What we try to do is have success with the customer. So if we don't pay well, then you have turnover and things like that. So that's important to let the audience know that we treat fair the employees. We promote very nice work environments. We have very nice retention programs, because it's no longer recruiting, it's retaining the employees. So.
Okay. One of the other questions, I saw a map where you put up on the screen, it had green dots all over Mexico. Are there certain geographic areas in Mexico that are more popular for automotive companies?
I would say yes, and certainly the what is known as the Nafta corridor. Okay, that's certainly all the way. Guanajuato, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Aguascalientes, the state of Nuevo León, and then Coahuila, Saltillo. So that Nafta highway for sure, and then the west coast. Puebla is also is been there. So I usually take those, and here is where we can certainly complement the answer. But basically, the Nafta corridor, the west coast in terms of Chihuahua, Hermosillo, and Tijuana, and Puebla that has been there for quite a while.
It's where the automotive companies are.
Yeah,
right?
where the
Just the
OEMs.
supplies.
Yeah, it's where the OEMs are, right?
Well, the state of Chihuahua has plenty of auto suppliers also, Juárez, Chihuahua, and Monterrey.
The oldest cluster of the auto industry is in central Mexico. We're talking about 80 years ago.
By the Bahia?
It's central Mexico, Estado de Mexico, Puebla, some areas. Then start to develop northeastern cluster, which is Monterrey and Saltillo. That was the second one, very much oriented to export. Then become the Bajío cluster, growing also with OEMs or in that area, but then start to scatter all over Mexico with the Ford plant in Hermosillo, and then tier ones, tier twos, very much export oriented in Chihuahua, Tijuana, northern Sonora. So it's pretty much all over.
Yeah, yeah.
And it depends if they're for local market or they're going to export also because of the logistics costs.
Yeah,
also.
yeah. All right, last question. One for each of you.
Yeah.
Give us a little description of an automotive company that you are using that uses you right now. You don't have to name it, but just talk a little bit about it.
Okay, so we've been on automotive. We've been seeing more complex processes of automotive and engine components. That's what we are seeing today. Water pumps, alternators, and components of that kind.
Okay. Paulina?
We're going now into the electric automotive suppliers. So we got a couple of glass, the glass of the Tesla suppliers and computer, the central computer. So this is going to be very competitive now with the labor, which is more skilled labor requirements, bilingual labor. So the demand now will be a little bit more higher and better, of course, for Mexico.
Yes, in my case, we started in 2004 with an injection molding company from Japan. They do ashtrays, cup holders, and vents. And we have very nice, because we started with them in Chihuahua, and then we went with them to Monterrey, and then we went with them to Bajío. And two of them, they're still with us since then. And that's a very nice experience on the automotive industry.
We have more than 30 tier 1s, tier 2s auto component manufacturers. And lately we have been approached by companies producing components for the new EVs, electric vehicles, that are moving very fast, at very fast pace to Mexico to produce components in Mexico. Tesla is not the only one, there are others, although Tesla has more than 100 suppliers in Mexico already. But it is growing a lot.
That's interesting.
It's growing a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is it for today. Thank you, all of you who stuck with us for the whole, well, at least till the end. I don't know if you were here the whole time, but thank you for staying. Now there is a cocktail hour, again, as it was last night at the Stars at Night Ballroom Pre-Function and Terrace, sponsored by Greater SATX. See you tomorrow. Vicky, you have something else?
Yeah, we have an important message for the people in virtual because they have to be, it's so important because they have a different link for tomorrow. It's not the same link for today, so they have to check the email, and it's a new link that you have be here tomorrow at 7:45 more or less, because at 8 a.m. We have the first panel, very important panel, with a new link that we send you tonight. We'll see you tomorrow. Do you have another message?
I think that's it.
Perfect. We'll see you in the cocktail, the person that are here in person. And for the virtual, we'll see you tomorrow at 7:45 a.m. with the same attitude, with the same questions, with the same comments. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you for the people here. Thank you for the staff. And thank you, Bruce. We had a great day today.
Thank you, Vicky.